Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we're talking about the Enneagram types and the experience of time and time management in terms of what that might mean for the 9 types. And of course, we'll put subtypes and instincts in there too.
Excellent. Before we do that, Bea is in London. If you're watching this on YouTube or seeing this as a video cast, then we're in person. She's here at my office, and we had great retreats here. Mm-hmm. And also, we watched a nice movie the other day.
Yeah.
Maybe we could mention it.
Yeah. I was walking by a local theater here in your neighborhood, and I noticed that Wicked was opening the next day on Friday. And so we looked at all the times it was playing, and we figured out a time. So we ended up seeing it the next morning, 10:45 a.m. matinee on Friday, and we saw Wicked, and it was fantastic. I was really looking forward to seeing it. I had never seen the play, but of course grew up seeing The Wizard of Oz, and never seen Wicked, which is the prequel, and it was incredible. And I think we really loved it, and we're laughing and whispering a lot.
Why?
Well, mainly because one of the main characters is such an obvious type 2. And it was very, very, very funny the way she portrayed. Initially, I thought maybe a sexual 2, but probably more a social 2 with sexual second. But just very, very funny. The pride and the whole thing. It was hilarious.
Glinda, right?
Glinda, played by Ariana Grande, who did an amazing job.
I was very impressed with her as an actress.
Yes.
And also, I personally think that what's the name of
Elphaba, the Wicked?
I saw her more as a 5. There could be arguments for 4, but especially if you see the original story, I think that in the movie itself, she looks more like a social 5. But anyway, it's much more about spiritual things and process of growth,
magic, and consciousness, good and evil, and there are many really interesting themes.
Also a great sexual 7 character.
Yes, the prince is a pretty obvious 7, and again, I think it's a little less obvious what Elphaba is, played by Cynthia Erivo.
I can check.
But she was also fantastic, an amazing singer and actress. And but I saw her a little more as a 4, partly because she's green in the movie, and of course there are themes in the movie that
Cynthia
Erivo. Yeah. She was incredible also, and I saw her characters a little more of a 4. She's green, which is, I can't help but thinking green with envy, and she's sort of treated as an outcast from early on, but also is and when she's very magical, and when she gets angry, everything kind of goes chaotic, and she shakes things up. But a great movie, recommended for everyone to see. And in addition to the interesting Enneagram type aspect, just a fun movie.
And the sexual 4 is played by Jonathan Bailey.
You mean the sexual 7?
The sexual 7, yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
Anyway, just mentioning because it's our recommendation if you haven't watched it. And
I just want to say one more thing, is the director is from my hometown almost. John Chu is the son of Chef Chu, which if you're from the San Francisco Bay Area in Los Altos, which is right south of where I grew up in Palo Alto, Chef Chu's is a Chinese restaurant that I grew up going to all the time. It's an excellent restaurant. And so I just found it really interesting that the director, who's directed many excellent movies of Wicked, was from, my area. And interesting, I heard him on a podcast lately, and also a very interesting guy. And I think really great movies, really, when you see something where all the acting is good and all of the different elements are good, I think it points to a really a really high level director. And I thought the direction was incredible too.
Yes. So let's talk about time.
Yes, let's talk about time. We had this idea to talk about the Enneagram types and time. And there are different aspects to this. I think we'll go through the 9 types and talk a little bit more about time management. I think that's kind of a specialty of yours, isn't it? As
In the
from
past,
your
yeah, I
business
worked a
career in the
bit with
past.
that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, time management, that not to say that you're an expert in terms of your own ability to manage time.
This is why I stopped teaching it.
Yeah. Those who can't do teach, right? That's
well, yeah. Well,
yes.
well, I don't think so. But I eventually I started feeling embarrassed when
Yeah.
teaching that.
There's
Yeah.
time and there's Brazilian time. Yeah.
Brazilian repressed people are a bit complicated.
Yes, exactly. And but I think I have to say that you have gotten better over the years under my influence.
It's because I fear you. I'm scared of you
Sounds
and
like
your
a healthy
reaction.
fear.
Okay, if you say so.
Yes. I can remember when we first started working together and you thought nothing of being 20 to 30 minutes late for when we had to teach a course. And of course, Americans tend to be a little bit more on time, a little more punctual. Maybe not as much as other cultures, but definitely not as loose with time as
Right.
as the Brazilians, if
Well,
I can say that.
we'll need to talk about instincts, not only types
Yes.
here, and then the triads, the
Yes.
relationship with time for head types, heart types, body types, and and I guess I just want to say that when we grow and get to really higher levels of awareness and start having spiritual experiences, then the concept of time completely changes until it actually ceases to make sense. It's like it's a timeless experience, and we go beyond what we call the time and space matrix. But we are not going to talk about this here.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. We are going to talk about the personalities' experiences of time. And the only thing we might say that has a little bit to do with growth are perhaps time management tips.
Yes. Yeah. How you can get more conscious of what your tendency is when you're more in personality, so that you can even use time management as one of the things you're doing to grow and become more aware of what your default mode is when around time and what you can do to be more conscious and grow through being more aware of how you relate to time, how you use time, how you manage time. But one thing I think is interesting is that, and I haven't thought this through fully, so this will be sort of a potentially incomplete thought, is that there are some types that tend to be more focused on the future, some more on the past, and some more on the present.
Right.
I'm going to say a couple that are, to me, are a little more obvious, but then I want to hear from you of what you think, how you would, I don't know if you would can classify all 9 types, but obviously I think 7s are very focused on the future, very futuristic thinkers in terms of what's possible. It's one of the things that they do very well as both, I think, a natural strength, but also something where they can, in personality, do it as a way of running away from the present, which can not be so good for them. And then there's 4s who I think obviously typically tend to focus a lot on the past, although they can also compare their present self to the past or an idealized future. But I think sometimes 4s dwell a little bit more in the past, sometimes as a way to, sometimes in a way to wallow in suffering, like if only this had happened, or a kind of nostalgia for the past. But 4s tend to be a little bit more past oriented. And then I know that me as a 2, I tend to be very focused on the present. And I think 8s can also focus on the present, also too. It's a little bit like I tend to be very focused on, okay, what's happening now? And it's very interesting. And this relates to time. And I hadn't thought of this before, but whenever I get a calendar, and by the way, I'm old, so I still haven't completely surrendered to the calendar on my phone, right? I still have a paper calendar, although using it less and less, especially when I'm on the road traveling. But when I have a paper calendar, I need to have a month at a glance. I need to see the whole month. But to me, that's the present, right? It's like, and when I look at, what's going on this week or next week or right now, I need to see the whole month. It's so interesting. And this is what I've been doing for many years. I always have a month at a glance calendar. So I open it, and today is just a square, one of 28 or 30 or 31 squares, but I need to kind of see the present time, which to me is about a month, in order to have sort of the context of today and this week and next week kind of thing. What else do you think about the types and just that general sense of time focus?
Yeah, I'll comment on other things you said later on. I'll just say that I think my only perhaps slight disagreement would be that 8s, I think, are also sometimes futuristic and not only present.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Like looking towards the future,
the big picture, like how to move things forward. Yeah,
but I do agree that they keep connected with what's happening here and now. I just want to say the being in the now moment is not the same thing as being in the here and now in terms of spiritual capacities and presence. It's not what we're talking about.
No.
It's more like being concerned. Actually, I wouldn't call it present. I would call it the immediate next thing. I like to say that also for ones, for instance. I think ones are pretty much in that space most of the time.
Yeah.
But I think we can talk about each type as we go.
So in this podcast, we're going to talk about the head types and time management tips. And then in 2 other podcasts, we'll talk about the body types and the heart types and time management, because it turns out there's a lot to say.
Yes.
So this one will focus on the head types.
Fantastic, because sometimes they complain that they are always last. So
fine with me.
My head type buddies will perhaps be happy that we'll start with them.
And perhaps you've thought the most about the head types in time, being a head type yourself. And
I think it's a bit more complex to describe what happens with head types and the concept of time.
I would imagine it would be.
Yeah. So let's start with complexity.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think head types, in general, tend to procrastinate more because of this need for certainty and avoidance of anything that they don't control or they don't see. It's like intolerance of uncertainty, and it's not as easy for head types to jump into action, and they keep thinking and thinking and thinking a bit more and having new ideas. They don't engage with action per se very quickly. All 3 head types, in my view, and it changes a little bit. I think some 6s can be a bit different, but usually, if we talk in a generic way, this would be true in my view. And at the same time, there is so much abstraction and theory and some things that head types suppose and think about, that they are not necessarily connected to what's truly happening right now. It's a lot about the world of ideas and possibilities and more. So I think that time many times can be seen as a limitation for head types, and they tend to try to make it more relative. And it's a bit more difficult than for the other 2 triads, in my view, to stick with time as a very concrete thing. But having said that, I think that instincts also play a big role. I see, for instance, friends who are 5s like me, but are not repressed, and friends from Brazil. So I'm comparing to similar cultural backgrounds. They are not as bad as I am when it comes to the control of time and the concept of time. I tend to be very optimistic when it comes to thinking that something will happen in a timely fashion.
Extremely optimistic.
I see that this thing triggers you a little bit. or I do, maybe.
Oh, well, yes. There are many things to say about that, but I can't tell you how many times we'll be doing something in a retreat and you'll say, oh, I think we can do the next thing in 20 minutes. And it takes 2 hours. And I'm thinking to myself, it's going to take much longer than 20 minutes. So I think that's just an illustration of what you were saying. So go on.
I think there's a little bit of wishful thinking when it comes to head types.
And you hate it when I say you get caught up in magical thinking.
Yeah.
But that would be an example.
Well, people who are not head types wouldn't believe the number of ideas we have in a matter of a few seconds.
Yes.
So everything gets complex in a matter of 7 or 8 seconds. And we think of many different things in that very short time frame. So if we are not balancing the centers, then the head tries to take control of everything, including how we experience time. So I think time tends to become a bit more relative and hard to grasp for head types.
Is it a little bit like you guys think you can control time with your mind?
I think we would like to. Yes. Yes, and we try to.
Yes.
And we keep being abstract, perhaps a little bit utopian in a way. At least I'd say 7s, 5s, and some 6s. But I think there is this arrogance, this mental arrogance, that I can control everything with my mind. And that's dangerous. And when it comes to time, I think we don't like to feel limited. And also, I think there is a linearity to time that is not pleasant for any head type. Head types don't like linearity.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that there 2 comes after 1 and 3 comes after 2. Like that thing of time. Now, time is inexorably moving forward. So it's like linear. And I would like things to be a bit more non-linear, and I'd like to do things together. Like I think head types want to do several things at a time,
at the same time.
And anything that's too linear and not flexible doesn't apply as easily for a head type's mind. But I guess I'm getting a bit complicated here.
Yes.
And anyway, I just want to say, I think in general for 5, 6s, and 7s, dealing with time is a little less easy than for the other 6 types. But having said that, I think we can talk about each of those 3 mental types.
Okay, which type do you want to start with?
I think 5, then we go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I think that it changes significantly depending on where self-preservation is in the sequence.
And by the way, I think talking about 5 and time with you could take a whole podcast in itself.
I'll control myself.
Okay.
I'll go against my tendencies.
Great.
Here.
Okay.
So I think when self-pres is high, there is a better competency in being punctual, in being in taking care of what can be done in a certain amount of time.
Right.
But going beyond the capacity to be punctual, what I want to say is that 5s have a relationship with time that it's unfortunately a very limited resource. That whenever a 5 looks at the clock and sees, oh, now I have X time for myself, for just recharging the batteries.
Like an hour.
It can be 10 minutes, an hour, or 1 day, or a month. It doesn't matter. Whenever a 5 looks at that, the first reaction is, it's not as much as I would like it to be. So the concept of time is that it's always missing. I would always like it to be more when it's about recharging batteries, being with myself, and more. And that, I think, is regardless of subtype or instinctual sequence. And it's a little bit like the opposite when you are with other people. Like with other people, you say, "Oh my God, there is still 1.5 hours to go." You know? So the concept of time depends if there is someone around or not. And I'm trying to be honest here. It's the first reaction.
That. Yeah, and I'm noticing that, like, it's so funny because, like, if you've had 3 hours to yourself, and then, like, I'm here staying with you in London, you and your family. If you've had 3 hours to yourself and we're supposed to meet, let's say at 4 o'clock, like, it drives me crazy if I get a message from you 5 minutes before 4. I need 15 more minutes. I'm thinking you had 3 hours. And I know that you're thinking I only have 3 hours, exactly, and it's not enough.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So fives have this counter, the countdown system.
Yes.
For everything, for energy, for how much energy is still there. It's like having that battery indicator, like on the laptop or the cell phone.
Right, and it goes down.
And the same thing. Time is always running against my wishes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first sense. But other than that,
like it's going faster than you'd like optimally.
Yeah, I think when I'm recharging, but it can be too slow
when you're with people.
Yeah,
and when waiting to get home.
Starting to regret disclosing this much here.
I told you this could be a whole podcast just on Uranio's fiveness and time.
And it's really nice when we relax that and just flow with whatever's happening and stop keeping time or taking time as something important. Disconnecting from the concept of time, as in getting to the flow. Don't use the limitations of time as a device for your avarice.
Right.
And also the stinginess, which is the fixation. So that is a key thing. But we do use time as a way to operate our ego. It's either for or against us, but we want to control others, and one way we do that is by controlling time with others or without others.
Right. Like when I can't take time to have dessert at the end of a meal at a restaurant, because it's imposing on your time frame.
You're a little bit like a unique case. Because of how long mealtime takes with you. Yeah.
So let's get to the
I think you lose concept of time when you are on a restaurant.
Well, yes. And when we get to twos and time in restaurants, that's a whole other subject.
Okay.
But what about the growth path for type 5? Like, what can they do to not be as worried about time? And can I remind you about this later?
Later when?
In an hour and 45 minutes.
Maybe. Okay, yeah, I think really disconnecting from taking time. Knowing what time it is right now, or what time you want to be back, or going more with the natural flow, and even your biological rhythm, instead of just seeing those numbers related to time. That would be a great growth edge.
Right. And maybe the whole idea of the virtue of non-attachment, like not being attached to the time frame or how many minutes you're taking, or how many minutes you'll be with people, but just allowing yourself to be in the moment and enjoy and flow.
In the territory of virtues, there isn't time as we know it, as I said in the beginning, but I won't go there. The thing is, I also believe that sometimes fives use time management techniques to control other people.
Yes.
Like, I'll tell you an example. When I travel alone, I don't feel as much of a need to plan for my trip as I do when I travel with my family. Because I want to control them. I don't want them to use my time in ways that I don't want to. And that was really painful when I observed and spotted that was why I was doing those huge Excel spreadsheets for our family trips. And my type 7 son pretty early on gave me bad feedback about that. about what happened during our family trips.
He has his own wishes for time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a lot about I'll manage time so that I'm not on your hands.
In your hands.
I'm not just allowing you to use my time in ways that I don't want to.
Right.
So, for instance, I see so many times in businesses how type 5 leaders, they create backlog of work, but above all, they put people on a line, on a queue for, you can have access to me later on in my own schedule, right? So that is a bad thing in managing time. It's managing time as in I'm not open to your requests and demands and your needs, right? So I think that also the concept of doing more is good for fives. Adding more instead of saying, no, I won't do it. No, I won't do it. So add in a bit more things. That would be growth hatch. But as you said, I said I was going to talk a little and I ended up talking too much.
Yes.
So sixes. Would you like to say anything else?
I guess I'll just say one thing is that I do want to give you a compliment, which is over time, you've gotten better about being on time, and I won't give myself all the credit for that.
Okay, yeah.
Type 6?
Thank you, yes. Okay, type 6. I think sixes are usually very stressed with time and time constraints. But
why is that?
Because anything stresses a 6.
That's
it's
true,
like a propensity to feel anxious about everything. So there won't be
including the
enough
passage
time.
of time.
There won't be enough time. But also procrastination goes to a new level with sixes. And they would like to test it over and over and over again.
Get it more information just to make sure they've thought of everything or have all the data and information they need.
And that is not good for a type 6 development. So we usually say that one of the best things sixes can do for their own development is to shorten timelines.
So would that be a time management tip for a 6? I think
so.
And what do you mean by that when you say shorten timelines?
I mean, you are thinking of a new project for yourself, and as a 6, you'll say, oh, next year. And then if you come to yourself and say, no, it's next month. And it won't be after next month. And then you announce it to other people. Then you need to go to limit your own doubts and your endless questioning and make things happen in that timely fashion. And that is good for you to work on yourself if you're a 6. So time management for 6s many times should mean shorten the timeline and have a deadline that is fast approaching, like that is not too far from now. And yet I think that 6s can be very stressed when they are just looking at the clock and seeing, oh, we won't have time. So it's more like what you said, like seeing the whole month or at least the week is a good thing for a 6, because they are one of those types that tend to be very stressed with what's right next, in my view. Although they also fear about the long-term future. But it's a lot like anxiety about what's about to happen, right? So it's good if they don't concentrate only in managing the day. By the way, one of the main authors, very remembered by people when it comes to time management, is Stephen Covey,
right?
Who, in my view, was a 7. I think his theories are very 7ish. But one of the main things for him is don't manage the day and don't manage the month, manage the week. So
I didn't know that.
He thinks that having a vision of the week is ideal.
That's the right time frame to really
and then you
manage.
Plan for the week in a few ways with some techniques, and then every day you think about the day in the beginning of the day, 5 minutes, but he has a weekly 30-minute process of time planning, of time managing. And I think that for 6s that is super good. When I used to teach that a bit, I would see sixes really benefiting from that method of thinking of the week. They would be less stressed. And sometimes sixes are the ones that try to fit in too much in one day.
Right. And I hate to go back to 5, but I just want to, I'm not sure.
You love talking about 5.
Well, I do, but I know we spent a lot of time on 5, and
it's okay.
I want to be fair to all the types, but I'm not sure that the time management tips for 5 were clear. So I want to make sure we do a few tips for all the types. And we talked a lot about 5, but can you, in a succinct way, say what are some time management tips for 5s? And then we'll again summarize for 6 before we move on.
In a more practical thing, like how you deal with your diary, I would say keep open spaces for people to reach out to you and that you will be available for them.
So
imagine someone who works in an office, instead of having only
everything
scheduled, you keep 1 or 2 hours time slots free for everybody who wants to reach out to you, and then you go be where people are.
Wow.
Like make yourself available. And what I find out is that if 5s sort of put that on the bill, on the budget,
the budget,
it's not as difficult
right.
for them, and they can be really available for that time, and it changes the way people see 5s, because they feel that the 5 is truly making themselves available. And if the 5 knows the time that will end, it becomes easier to be available.
Yes. Yeah. And I think when you were talking a lot about 5s a couple of minutes ago, I don't think you mentioned the budget, and I think that's very important for 5s.
So why don't you explain? Because
I love this concept. It's so funny, and it's just so foreign because I don't think this way as a 2. But how a lot of things boil down to if it's in the budget or not, right? Like if you've budgeted for that time, then it's okay. Like if you've only budgeted to be at a party for an hour and a half and it gets beyond that, then the stress or the resentment or the desire to go intensifies.
Yeah, I think I can give an example.
Please.
Yeah, I think it's funny if we talk about 5s, at least for you. Yeah. So I think these days, actually last 2 days, we were teaching online. And then all of a sudden, you were not there at a time that I was thinking you would be there, right before the class for us to talk.
Right.
And that was apparently because you thought I hadn't said anything, and therefore I wouldn't be there, and you were a bit concerned with not invading my space or whatever. But to me, we had agreed months ago, years ago, that every time that we teach, we meet an hour before we start. And I had a very hard time agreeing to that rule back then.
Yes.
It probably took me over a year to agree, because I couldn't understand why someone would like to connect daily, before teaching
to have
a class.
Plenty of time to prepare.
What do you mean you need to connect with me? We are connected already. We connected last month, right?
Right.
So nothing changed. I didn't say anything, so we keep connected. So, but it's not exactly like this for you.
Right.
So it took me a long time to digest the idea of having to commit to that full hour before a teaching day, to connect and talk, and also to plan, because nowadays I want to plan less, differently than in the beginning for me. But then it happened that you didn't show up, and I thought we had agreed because we talked about this 2 years ago, and it has been happening this way. So yeah, 5s are weird.
Yes.
But the thing is, I felt resentful because you were, taking my time with something that I thought we had agreed, and you were not doing something, and then you were resentful also because I hadn't talked with you, and then we had to talk a little. in order for everything to be okay. One of those things that teach us a lot, right? But the thing is, if there is a time commitment, make it a general rule with a 5.
I see.
Instead of saying every time let's confirm or reconfirm, it's more like give me that month to swallow the bad news that I'll need to spend even more time with you, whoever you are. You can be the love of my life, and it will still be difficult.
Or the best business partner ever.
and then you can you just make that a rule, and that is in the budget. That's what being in the budget means.
I see.
So I've already
it's expected.
I've already accounted for that.
You've accounted for it.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And this is, 5s don't like surprises. And so they're surprised by something that wasn't budgeted for, then there's going to be more stress and resentment.
Yes.
Potentially.
And
but
the way it
go
works,
back to 5 for so
the way
long.
it works is, yes, I now have committed to this hour-long thing that you need, and as a consequence, don't take 20 minutes with your dessert in the evening.
Because I've already budgeted you time for more time tomorrow than I had hoped, and so don't take time away from me the night before.
Or we can meet for 40 minutes.
Or we can take time away. Yeah, like you say.
It's crazy. We are always making calculations in the head, and that's the problem for 5s.
Right.
But anything else about 6s?
Yeah, 6s. I had a question about 6s. So, thinking especially about self-preservation 6s, because I know that self-preservation 6s are the ones that sometimes have the hardest time going into action. In other words, they can take a long time to make a decision or to do something that they need to do. And sometimes the time keeps getting pushed back that they're actually going to take action. And you have said that it's good for 6s, and especially I would think self-preservation 6s, to shorten their timelines. But how is a self-pres 6, like what are some tips for a self-pres 6 to do that, to move up the time they actually take action or do something, to limit the procrastination, given that I think it's probably hardest. They're one of the types or subtypes that it's hardest to go into action because of the doubt and the questioning and the sometimes not feeling secure enough or strong or powerful enough to really move into action at a certain time. Is there any tip you can give for them? And maybe you can also say something for the other 6s if that seems appropriate.
So I think it's important to go to the body and to move physically, and then talk to someone and call someone instead of just contracting. And this is for the self-pres 6, the more phobic 6.
Yeah.
And it has to do with owning your own power and saying, I won't depend on anybody's authority to make this thing happen. And it's time, and it's now. I can't wait anymore. So we always say that fear exists only in anticipation. When a 6 stands up and goes do, fear goes away. So working with goals is super important for 6s. And goals
sounds like goals and deadlines.
Yeah, because the concept of goals implies having deadlines and a quantity and a quality. So there's no such a thing like a goal without a deadline. So in this sense, for a self-pres 6, it's important, but also 6s in general can benefit, in my view, from having goals. So that this is, in my view, the objective. But forcing oneself to start doing right away instead of just thinking and planning. And that's for all 6s. But I'd say for sexual 6s, it's about not only moving, but breathing in and down and calming down a little more, because there is this movement against things. So stay a little bit and ground yourself a little, come inside more, and then you can move. And then for social 6s, they need to do more pauses when during the day. they tend to do one thing after the other without pauses.
A little bit 3-ish, yeah.
Yeah, and it's very important for them to be a little less productive, in my view, because this is one of the types that suffer with more episodes of burnout, actually.
Yeah,
and one day we'll have to talk about stress and burnout here at the podcast.
Yeah.
This is what I'd say about sixes.
Okay. And in terms of sixes, would you say that they're more future oriented, immediate time period, or past oriented?
Like can I call it immediatists? Like being a bit more concerned with what's going to happen right now, and I can't stop focusing on that thing that is threatening. I think that's a little bit of a challenge for sixes, but they can be, one thing I admire a lot in sixes, and it's quite rare, and not many people have this quality. It is being able of having the bigger picture in mind, the strategic view of everything, and then narrowing down and going into the detail. So usually people are either or, right? And sixes can do both. And I believe that this helps with time management. They are not as bad as sevens and fives, I think, because of that. They can, and they are more moved by feeling responsible.
Right. And I think being good problem solvers, and not problem solvers like sevens who are looking more optimistically at solutions. They're sort of looking at the negative data, what needs to be handled, or what the problem is.
Right. Now, what I think is a good growth tip for sixes is to learn how to prioritize, because many times they think that if it's a problem, it needs to be solved, but then they dedicate the same amount of time and energy to problems that are really very different in terms of importance.
Yeah.
So it's hard for them to say, "Oh, I'll let that happen." What's the worst thing that can happen if that goes wrong? So working on the 20% most important problems and letting the other 80% be okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I think I like this conversation because I think it applies both, like in work and in life. As you're talking, I'm thinking there are a lot of work applications, but also life generally.
Yeah, and for social sixes, especially if they get very resentful because they end up solving problems for everybody in the family or the office. And then those people get like accommodated to that situation, and they feel good, and the six gets resentful, but then the six tries to delegate, and as soon as they see that's not happening, they bring it back to themselves.
They undelegate it.
Yes. So it's very important to let things happen, like don't go well, so that people start owning their parts.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about type 7.
Yeah, I think that typically sevens tend to be too optimistic about
how much time things will take, and yes, I think probably sevens are the worst offender when it comes to sort of magical thinking, like however long I think it will take, it's really something of their own creation, not always grounded in practical reality. Although I would imagine self-preservation sevens are a little better at that, because they tend to be more pragmatic, they tend to be more on the ground and in touch with what's actually happening, versus say a sexual seven who's more in their imagination, who's more divorced from reality and more dreaming of how long something will take, and that's the reality they live in instead of the actual time that it might take.
Yes. And of course, sevens will always find a way to have time for fun, pleasure, leisure, distractions and downtime, which is very good for them. But sometimes, look, what is gluttony? Gluttony is the passion of type 7. It's variety. And many times it has to do with trying to do several things at once. And that has to do with, I don't want to be limited by time, and I want several things happening within this hour. And I'm not willing to postpone the rewards. I want the rewards to happen as soon as possible. As you said, self-press sevens sometimes can postpone a bit more, but it's what my point is, gluttony is in itself a problem with time. Like, I don't think that time for me shouldn't work like for other people.
Time doesn't apply to me in a way. It's like I want to do things in whatever way I want to do them, and in whatever experience I want to have, and time bends to my will. It's a little bit like that.
Yes. And if then a 7 can choose a job because there is more time flexibility. I see that happening a lot. And so it's like, don't control me and my freedom by making me do things linearly and having to stay for this long in something that's not as pleasant, and doing just one thing for too long. So gluttony is inherently a problem with time.
And it's also, I mean, sevens have this big dislike of boredom, right? And I'm saying boredom in quotes because a lot of things get called boring, you know, if there is any kind of unpleasantness or difficult experience, like discomfort involved.
But also boredom exists only in the perspective of time. Nobody is bored with anything in the first second. You know? I get bored after 5 minutes, after 5 days.
This is tedious. I don't want to keep doing this over a longer period of time than I already have.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to say is, to me, sevens are the quintessential type among the 9 that has problems with the concept of time itself. I don't want this thing to apply to me. I want to bend time on my favor, as you said. So this has to do with ego, and 5s like to call it freedom. And freedom is good, isn't it? But that's
freedom
ego.
From limitation, and the limitation of time.
Exactly.
It's like I don't see myself limited by that. Like I take as much time as I want if it's fun, and I avoid something as much as I want if it seems like it will take my time with an unpleasant or uncomfortable experience.
And I do think that the growth edge here is, my day has only 24 hours and I have certain needs, for instance, for sleep.
Well, I've actually heard a 7 friend of mine used to always say, like, he'd rather have fun than sleep. Like, sleep was low on the priority list.
And guess what? Sevens are perhaps the type, together with 5s, I think, with the biggest sleep problems. And that has to do with disrespecting your own needs because of your desires.
I thought 6s also have sleep problems because they can't turn off the thinking and the anxiety.
I think 6s too. You're right. Head types are problematic when it comes to sleep.
And other things too.
But I think that a good thing for 7s to do, if they want to grow, is to be more realistic when it comes to time. So it's good for me if I sleep these many hours, and the rest of the day I can do many things, but I won't try to squeeze in more stuff.
I think also slowing down, right? Because I used to know a 7 who talked really fast. And of course, there are many 7s that talk really fast. Not all 7s, but it's almost as if he was trying to get in all the words and there was never enough time, you know, and so that he was always moving faster and faster to fit everything in. So I think it's, of course, really important for 7s. I mean, all of us, but especially 7s, to focus more in the here and now present moment, as opposed to always looking ahead or always thinking about the future or rushing to fit everything in, to have as many experiences as possible. They're probably the biggest multitaskers, them and 3s maybe. And so I think it's about slowing down. So I think time management, it's one of these things that it's paradoxical. I wonder if 7s, tell me what you think of this. It's like, paradoxically, I think 7s can, if they slow things down, they can actually have a better experience of things.
They can enjoy things more.
Exactly. They think they have to fit in all the pleasure, all the enjoyment, and, even work, I think, can be enjoyable for sevens. Sevens often say, like, I make work fun, but they can try to fit everything in. And of course, that when they're, in gluttony and fitting all this in, or maximizing their time in all the ways in their head they think they can, often they're not really available to experience what's really happening in a deeper way.
They are missing out, actually. They are not enjoying things as they are right now.
And of course, they have fear of missing out, FOMO, more than any other type.
And then they do.
Right, exactly.
Because of that fear.
Right.
The thing is, being calmer, slowing down pace, and sticking with this one thing that's happening is what allows us to feel joy, the joy of the real moment, the now moment, instead of just being caught in this addiction for pleasure and excitement and stimulus that goes away after seconds. Right.
So you were saying that you thought Stephen Covey was a 7. And so what do you think? I mean, here's a 7 who's writing about habits for people to be more productive, or, make best use of time.
This is the thing. It wasn't for people to be productive. His theory is all about helping people to balance their lives and do all the roles in their lives.
Okay. And it's a more healthy 7 perspective. Would you say that?
I think it's healthy in general, and more ecological way of living, and paying attention to all roles, but also most sustainable, I'd say. But it's also something that attends to the 7 need of doing a little bit of everything. Right. So I can spot the ego behind his theory also.
Right.
And it's all about, his thing was, time management should be about the compass and not the clock.
So it's not, and not the clock.
It's not doing more in an hour. It's doing the right things. And
sort of directing yourself more consciously in terms of what you want to get done or what your goal is.
Yes. And sometimes having more time for family, if you work a lot, or things that are really good. I really like his theory, but it applies better for 7s. It's easier. 7s love it because they can do a little bit of everything. They run away from,
but in a better way.
The pressure of time management. Because previously, and even some other authors, time management used to be, let's be productive, as in doing more with less time. Right. So that's not his thing.
Right. So would you say it's a 7 giving good advice to 7s, or is it a little bit of ego, a little bit of higher self?
Both. There is, for instance, one very good advice he gives for 7s.
Is it just improving the personality, or is it going beyond the personality?
It's a little bit of both, but mostly going beyond.
Oh, good.
Like, for instance, he talks about the quadrants, 4 quadrants. One of the quadrants is things that we end up doing, but they're neither important nor urgent. And we need to get rid of those. And I can see that 7s as well as 9s do a bit more of those things than other types.
That are not important and not urgent.
They end up doing useless things just as a matter of distraction. Right? Or they got caught by an interest, like opening emails that have nothing to do with what you need to do.
Right.
And then he says these things should be avoided. And that's a good thing for 7s.
Yeah, one time when I was doing a work with a team, there was a 7 that said in the work setting, when he has a week until a deadline, he may have 4 things to do to complete that project by the deadline, but 2 days before the deadline, he has 10 things to do.
Exactly, yes.
So he's added things to the list instead of taking things away. So it's something for them to watch out for.
Yeah, and he suggests you decide the quadrant 2 things for the week. So you think of things that are important and non-urgent that you're going to do this week. And you decide 3 or 4 goals for the week in order to make those important but not urgent things to happen before your calendar gets all filled in with urgencies only. He talks about the syndrome of urgency, urgency syndrome. And it's important to do things that are important but not urgent. So you determine goals.
You discern what's important and what's urgent.
Yeah, but then you decide what are 2 or 3 things that I'm going to do this week that are important but not urgent. And then you, as you decide what those will be, you're also saying, I'm not going to do the other ones this week. So it's a little bit the art of saying no to what you're not going to do, which is a good thing for 7s also.
Right, exactly. So we've talked a lot about the head types and time management. So in the next podcast, we'll talk about the body types and their experience of time and some time management tips, in this thorough way that we've done with head types. And then in the next podcast, we'll do a third podcast. This will be a 3-parter. We'll talk about heart types and time.
Yes, fantastic. Looking forward to that. And I'll ask you many questions about choose.
I can't wait.
Okay.
So thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, we hope you'll join us again next time for the Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.